Chapter 81. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 81. Hotbed, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. The duo went further into the tunnels, for Melitel knew how long after Roy was done eating the plants. Since their supplies were running low, they estimated it had been 4 days, so they'd been in the tunnels for nearly a week at that point. Letho managed to walk by propping up his broken leg with his short swords and a piece of cloth while using GWIHYR as a crutch. Luckily for them, the journey was peaceful. The monsters must have died from extreme starvation. The stagnant air finally began to flow, and that told them the exit must have been near. They were close to the surface, close to leaving the darkness of the tunnels behind. Shoo! When they arrived into a bigger cavern after going through the narrow tunnel, Letho shushed Roy and put out his torch. Roy looked to where Letho was pointing, only to vaguely see a Nekker warrior dragging its hands around the entrance. The Nekker warrior was obviously bigger and stronger than the ones they'd faced before. It probably ate more than its brethren. It looked like an ugly, burly, hunched man, prowling like a guard dog. Its eyes were gleaming in the darkness, its nose twitching. And then it inched closer to the duo when it smelled their scent. But before it could get closer, Roy pierced its head with a bolt, and it fell with a thud. You killed a Nekker warrior. EXP plus 30. Roy kept his crossbow before going to take his spoils, but Letho held his shoulder. A moment later, 2 more Nekkers came out of the tunnel, and then a bloody scene followed. They didn't notice the duo, and they were attracted by the fallen Nekker warrior's body. The pair took a whiff before pouncing on it. One of the Nekkers gnawed on the neck, while the other dug into the thigh. Their sharp teeth easily tore through the body's skin, severing vessels and flesh. And they gobbled everything down before looking up to the sky to swallow the flesh. When they were done, they licked their lips clean with their lizard-like tongue before going for another bite. The cavern was silent, aside from the sounds of chewing and tearing. Flesh and blood spewed everywhere, turning that spot into a gory mess. About 30 seconds later, a considerable part of the body had been devoured, leaving nothing but bones behind. The Nekkers stopped after eating a fifth of the body, and they dragged the remains into the tunnel behind them. Those Nekkers looked starved. Roy gasped, a chill running down his spine. Why didn't they finish it? Nekkers have a clear hierarchy. Letho coughed. Much like lions and wolves, the higher echelons enjoy the meat first. In this case, the warriors and leaders have the privilege to feast first. Once they're done, they'll give some to the nest, and then the normal Nekkers eat last. Those guys didn't take too much because they didn't want to anger their boss. He heaved a sigh. They were eating the body so they could evolve. Those kinds of creatures benefit from devouring the flesh of those more powerful than them. Evolution's more important to them than the desire to feast. Roy nodded, but then his face fell. They have a boss. I hope it's not a Nekker chieftain. Nekker chieftains were stronger and harder to handle than warriors. A single chieftain could rally the disorganized Nekkers and have them work together. The duo waited for half an hour before approaching the feasting ground. The body left trails of blood and flesh, so the duo wiped that all over them before drawing 5 diagonal lines on their faces. Then they hunched and trudged inside, not unlike the Nekkers. After turning a few corners, they came to an exit and saw the light at the end of the tunnel. The exit was right there, but what they saw made their faces fall. 30 feet away, light illuminated the group Nekkers sprawled on the ground. They were entwined, squirming, grunting, not unlike pythons in heat. There were at least 90 of them, making them the biggest tribe the duo had ever seen. The body that was dragged in by the Nekkers earlier was placed behind the sleeping tribe, where their nest rested. Most of the body had been devoured, and the ribcage was revealed. Roy was reminded of mutton and beef on display. Sitting beside the nest was a green Nekker whose skin looked like armor. It was supporting its chin with its hand, and its eyes were closed, as if it were a thinker. It could have been one, if not for its thunderous snoring. As its chest heaved, its fangs would reveal themselves from time to time. Normal neckers were only 5 feet 4, but the green necker was 6 feet. It was taller than all the others. Even when it was asleep, it exuded a cruel, violent air. Necker Chieftain age. 20 years old, HP 100, strength 8, strength of greed +2, dexterity 6, strength in numbers +1, constitution 10, strength of greed +3, perception 5, will 5, strength in numbers +1, charisma 2, spirit 3, skills. Leap attack level 8. Neckers have great leaping ability, allowing them to attack from 10 feet away. It can leap toward its target quickly, attacking it with its fangs and claws. It gains +2 in strength when it leaps. Lasts 30 seconds. Corpse venom level 8. Neckers live in places filled with corpses and decaying flesh. Thanks to that, their claws and fangs are imbibed with venom. Their attacks can weaken their target and cause bleeding as well as heat them up and cause intense pain. Strength of greed, passive. Necker chieftains have ingested a great amount of flesh and have undergone 2 evolutions. They possess far superior life force and strength compared to normal neckers. Constitution +3, strength +2. Strength in numbers, passive. Whenever neckers move in packs, they gain +1 in dexterity and will. Leader, passive. Necker chieftains are the leaders of neckers. Neckers lower in rank can't go against its orders. Shit, Roy cursed silently. After all the battles they'd fought, they'd run out of bombs, potions, and oils. To make things worse, Letho was out of commission, and it took all he had just to move around. How are we supposed to fight them? They have a chieftain with them. He pondered on a way to escape. There was only one option left. They had to go through the squirming swarm without alerting even one of them, or they'd be dead if they were swarmed. Roy squinted in an attempt to see a way out, even if the way was a narrow path. Letho suddenly tugged at him and gave him a look that said, "Get back inside." Letho stared into his eyes. "Listen to me, boy. You're going to leave by yourself later," he commanded. "You're agile enough to get past them silently and quickly. Neckers don't sleep for long. If you miss this chance, but what about you?" Roy interrupted, looking at Letho's fractured right leg. "You got another idea?" Roy sounded excited. "Yeah. You getting away safely is better than us getting trapped here." Letho paused. "You can get some help when you escape. I can easily hide for a bit." "As if, Letho. You can barely walk, let alone hide from them." He shook his head, refusing. "It's not the time to play here. I'll give you a piggyback ride, and that's it." Letho wanted to say something, but Roy said, "You're asking me to be a deserter. A coward." Roy started convincing him. "I'll be racked with guilt if I escape alone. I'll just be another Seville Hoger. That guilt's going to haunt me forever, and if I bring it into the trial, it'll be the end of me." Letho took a deep breath. "He got me good. Very well then. We shall fight together once again." They tiptoed to the necker heap to observe them for a while. Most of the neckers were entangled tightly, leaving no space, but there were some small spots between arms, legs, or the neckers. Just enough for them to stand in. They looked ahead and managed to find an escape route, though a narrow one. Roy nodded at Letho, and then they started moving. Letho was 2 times heavier than Roy, so giving him a piggyback ride was no small feat. Roy felt like he was being crushed by a small hill, his face turning scarlet and his veins bulged. Roy's breathing turned heavy, but he kept his mouth shut. He puffed his cheeks, gritted his teeth, and tried his best not to make a sound. When he put his left foot into the space between 2 neckers, a terrible stench assailed him. Roy could see every inch of the neckers' faces, and they were hideous. They were filled with blotches, and their skin was disgustingly rough. They wore nothing but loincloths, the bloated flesh of their bodies in full sight. Their mouths were filled with sharp fangs that had flesh stuck between them. He never expected to observe a living necker at such a close distance, but it was terrifying. He was worried they would suddenly open their eyes and attack him, but that was just his imagination. Roy solidified his leg's grip on the ground before taking a 10-second rest. Then he stepped into the space between the necker's arms. But the moment he did, a single drop of sweat fell into one of the necker's open mouth. The necker smacked its lips, its face scrunching. At the same time, Roy took a deep breath and stood rooted in place. Letho extended his hand over Roy's shoulder, getting ready to cast Axii, but he didn't have to. A few moments later, the necker turned around to hold its companion's legs and snore. The same thing happened a few times, and it felt like the journey had taken an eternity. They felt like a guillotine was hanging over their heads, ready to lop them off at any given moment. One misstep or grunt could spell the end of them. However, Roy managed to control himself well thanks to his dexterity. His spirit helped him keep focus, while his will resolved him to take every step without fear. A long while later, someone said in Roy's mind, "You have passed the third trial, the necker's hotbed." There were only 20 feet left, but it took Roy 5 minutes to finish them. Exhaustion caught up to him the moment he let Letho go. He bent over with his hands on his knees. His chest heaved, and sweat trickled down his legs. Every cell in his body felt hot and sore, but when he looked back at the neckers, he felt accomplished. I made it through without leaving my comrade behind. But it wasn't time to celebrate. They quickly went past the chieftain, and it didn't seem to notice them. The chieftain still had its eyes closed, as if it were deep in thought. Eventually, they arrived at the exit, but it could only fit one person at a time, so Letho went ahead while he took the rear. However, a short while later, alarm bells started ringing in his head, so he turned around. Noel Daren standing at the tunnel's entrance was the chieftain. It was tilting its head toward Roy, observing him. Its back was hunched, and one of its claws was hanging above the ground, while the other was before its chest. Its gigantic eyes gleamed smugly, and a grin broke out on its face. Then it laughed. Roy was smeared in necker blood, but his camouflage was only effective with normal neckers, not the sly chieftain. The chieftain let out a loud screech, and the tribe of neckers awoke. Whipped into frenzy, they crashed into the tunnel, ready to kill the duo. Roy sighed. "I guess we can't run." He gave up on escaping. He could escape alone, but that meant he would have to leave Letho for dead. The only way left is to fight. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 82. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 82. The Exit, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash. Fortunately, the tunnel could only fit one person at a time, so Roy could pick the neckers off one by one. He fired a shot, the first necker dying on the spot, a hole bored through its head. That didn't stop the attack, for the second necker quickly leaped across the corpse and pounced at him on all fours. Roy couldn't reload in time, so he put his weight on one leg and swung his crossbow from right to left. Gabriel slammed against the necker's chin and crushed all its fangs. The necker fell back, howling in pain. "Switch with me, boy. Take the rear," Letho said hoarsely. He cast Agni, and the circle illuminated the tunnel, slowing down the neckers. "My legs hurt, but my arm isn't." "Shut up, Letho." Roy gripped his crossbow before grabbing the air and brandishing GWIHYR out of nowhere. "I can't hide behind an injured man like a coward. Time for me to protect you now." He thrusted the sword forward, stabbing the necker's chest. Then Roy kicked the necker and yanked his sword out. The blood splattered across his face, but he didn't care. His eyes started turning crimson from the mess. Then he slashed diagonally, and the blade sliced through the Necker's chest like butter. Fighting in a narrow tunnel was great, since there was no place to hide. All he needed to do was swing the sword around, and it'd hit a target. However, since his strength and technique were inferior to Lethos, he couldn't slice the Neckers in half in one blow. That flaw gave the Neckers a chance to attack. Even though their entrails were already spilled, they managed to claw at his left arm and drew blood. Roy winced. The scent of blood worsened their frenzy. The Neckers pushed their fallen comrades ahead like they were shields, slamming into Roy. GWYHYR was stuck in the meat shield, and before Roy could get it out, he was pushed back by a great force. He was still far too weak compared to a tribe of Neckers. Then Letho supported Roy from the back. He tried to hold himself up despite his bones almost being broken. He forced his muscles to give him one last push, and he stood up. At the same time, he extended his right arm across Roy's shoulder before making a blue triangle in the air, and then he pushed it forward. The air itself exploded, and Ard's impact sent the Neckers flying back, clearing the ground for them. Fine. If you're not backing off, then stay in the vanguard. I'll cast the signs whenever you need it. All right. The duo worked together once more, though their positions had switched. Roy, who had always been the rear guard, was standing in the vanguard, attacking with Gabriel and GWYHYR, changing his weapons to fit the situation. Sometimes he'd bore a hole through a Necker's head, then he'd change weapons and slice their body open. Blood was starting to drench him, and wounds were starting to pile up, but Roy showed resolve by refusing to take a step back. Letho stayed behind him, using his battle experience to cast signs in the most appropriate situations so he could sustain himself longer. He kept Erden up at all times to slow the Neckers, making them easier to kill. Be Nov calm if it were just a single Necker attacking Roy, he'd cast Axii to confuse it, creating an opening for Roy, but if they came in a group, he'd send them flying with Ard. It didn't take long for them to mesh well together. 2 minutes later, more than 15 Neckers lay dead at their feet, but new Neckers clawed their way through a few moments later. Once again, Roy stabbed a Necker's eyes with GWYHYR, piercing its head, and then he pulled the sword out. Blood trickled down the blade, and at the same time, it was trickling down Roy's trembling wrist. His breathing was heavy, and he started wobbling. The battle hadn't been long, but already his chest, shoulders, and arms were wounded. The Necker's venom started to work, making matters worse. He felt himself heat up, and pain coursed through his body like needles. His strength was leaving him, and his vision started to blur. And if that wasn't bad enough, Letho was almost running out of mana. Then, Roy vaguely saw a big monster come out of the Necker wave. It roared at Roy before pouncing on him, like a carriage hurtling toward its destination. Roy reflexively fired a bolt at it, and it hit the target in the eye, but oddly, the shot didn't kill it. The big monster howled in pain, but it didn't falter, though the arrow stuck out of its left eye like a sore thumb. Letho cast one final Axii to confuse it, and it was stunned for 1 second. Roy took the chance to stab it in the abdomen, and then he mustered the last of his strength to slash up, destroying its insides. Then blood spurted out of the wound. Most Neckers would have lost their strength from the pain and blood loss at that point, but the big one was stronger than most. Even after being injured grievously, it could still make one final attack. It howled into the heavens and glared at Roy with malice. A moment later, it slitted Roy's throat open with its claw, and its attack didn't stop until it sliced Roy's chest open. Roy's blood, flesh, skin, and bones flew through the air, and his blood spurted on the chieftain's face. An intense pain that was beyond the one he'd felt with the first potion coursed through Roy. He almost blacked out from it, but before he realized what was happening, he died. His eyes were unfocused, their gleam lost. All he could feel was the great darkness enveloping him, dragging him down to his final rest, never to see the sun again. Boy! Letho's familiarly hoarse voice became that one little ball of light that woke him for a split second, but that was enough for him. Level up. He saw a golden light flash before him, and then every cell in his body screamed in pleasure. Roy's eyes became focused once more, and they shone crimson. Roy cast fear, freezing the chieftain in place. In the final moments of its life, all it saw was a boy holding a sword, aiming for its neck. As the gleam of the sword illuminated the chieftain, everything around it started to spin, and it saw a headless body standing before the boy before everything faded to black. Blood spurted out of the chieftain's neck, and it fell back with a thud. You have killed a Necker chieftain. EXP plus 100. Level 4 Witcher, 600/2000. Roy had leveled up, but he didn't have time to check the details, for the fight wasn't over yet. He held Gabriel and Gwhyr, preparing to fight, but the Necker tribe ignored them. Instead, they dragged their dead chieftain's body out of the tunnel. Obviously, that was a far better reward than 2 humans, so the Neckers engaged in a skirmish over it. They started killing their brethren brutally, all for a bigger share of the chieftain's body. Letho snapped him out of it. We'd better leave now, boy. He looked at Roy's chest and neck, but there weren't any wounds, much to his shock. He had questions, but those could come later. You don't want to stay around and wait for a new chieftain to be born. They moved ahead in the tunnel, but the Neckers didn't give chase anymore. The sun was getting brighter and brighter, while things were starting to get more lively around them. Millipedes and spiders scurried between the cracks of the boulders, while star-nosed moles were burrowing out of the cracks, squeaking at the weird creatures before it. Roy was going ahead, working as hard as a mule. He was waiting for Letho to shoot his questions, but Letho hadn't seemed to notice the magical change that had happened in Roy. Even Roy couldn't believe it. The moment he leveled up, full recovery not only healed the lethal wounds, but also the injuries caused by the less hen. The skin of his injuries looked like it had been reborn. It was clear, clean, and didn't seem scraped. His whole body was healed, inside and out. His wounds weren't the only things that went away. Hunger, fatigue, poisoning, diseases, and even the exasperation after the long battle in the tunnels, had disappeared. He was, in a sense of the word, perfect. Full recovery is more powerful than I thought. There were a lot of new messages in his character sheet, but he'd leave that until they escaped successfully. Letho knew what he wanted to say, and a smile broke out on his blood-caked face. I don't want to know about your secret for now, boy. Not even if you're going to tell me you're Melitel's son. You can tell me when you really want to. The atmosphere finally returned to its peaceful state. After passing through 3 cobwebs, Melitel finally smiled at them. A hole appeared not far ahead of them, though it was high in the air. Dried vines and broken rope were dangling around the hole, and a broken ladder swayed beside them. The weather became warmer after they left the Mahakams. Roy didn't feel too cold, even though he wasn't wearing much. A golden light was shining down on them. Once Roy had settled Letho down, he put his hand above his eyes and went to the space under the hole. The light was blinding after the week of darkness in the tunnels. He had to squeeze his eyes shut when he looked up. After taking a while to adapt, he slowly opened his eyes. Gods, are you kidding me? I can't fly. Fate seemed to be pulling another prank, for the exit was 30 feet in the air. Even Witchers couldn't jump that high, and they were a lot stronger than most people. Roy was most people. He could see the blue sky, the glaring sun, and some dried grass through the hole. It was alluring, but he couldn't reach it. Which bastard cut the rope? He was like a lost traveler who saw an oasis in a desert, but when nearing it, found that it was nothing but a mirage. Roy didn't want to give up, so he fiddled with the ladder. Damn it. Even if Letho could stand above the ladder and lift me up, we still wouldn't reach the exit. And with how he is right now, Letho can barely walk. They had no choice but to give up on that exit, and they went ahead, finding something a short while later. On the wall was a sign with a pair of crossed hammers on it. Looks like Melitel hasn't given up on us. A wall stood at the end of the tunnel, seemingly blocking their path, but a few meters ahead, the ground sloped steeply downward. Roy went to take a look and noticed an underground pond that gleamed. The bit of light wasn't enough to shine on the whole pond, but Roy could vaguely see conical stalactite jutting out of it, as if they were the fangs of a beast. It was a nice pond, but its surface and the ground around it was covered in heaps of foul excrements. The pond was a shithole made by the Neckers. This is probably one of their toilets. It's flowing, so it probably leads outside. How else would those Neckers get their food? But a shithole at the end of the tunnel. Is this a joke? Roy felt disgusted, and he had a bad feeling about this. No. I have to find a way to escape through that hole. I can tie a rope to GWIHYR and toss it up. That might work. Keep this for me, boy. Letho unraveled the bandage around his leg and handed the short sword that was holding it in place to Roy. Okay. Roy kept the short sword and looked at the pond again. Why did you do that though? We don't have time for questions. Can you swim? Letho asked. Yeah. My home's near a river, you know. I always went swimming. Roy was talking about his previous world. Hey, wait. He knew something was up, so he made a break for the hole, but Letho was faster. He pulled Roy back and shoved him into the pond. Roy's eyes widened in horror, and then he held his breath and scrambled to grab something, but to no avail. He fell into the pond with a splash, plunging into the area with foul-smelling water. Congratulations. You're one big step closer to being a Witcher now. Letho hunkered down and took a deep breath before jumping into the pond after Roy. Book 2. The End. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 83. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 83. The Road to Elander, TL. Osaka, PR. Ash. The morning breeze blew across the vast plain, kissing the billowing smoke coming from the village afar, and it trailed toward a stream at the end of a roaring waterfall. The golden sunlight shone on the earth, but more particularly on a young man's naked body. The young boy was clutching his stomach as he retched into the stream. His face was pale, and there was nothing but bile left for him to puke. At the same time, he glared at the bald man on the grasslands who was resting his eyes and using his hands as pillows. The bald man was also in his birthday suit, but his sturdy build kept him safe from the cold wind's assault. You're still not done yet. Man, even dwarves can't beat you in drinking, I see. Roy rolled his eyes. Yeah, thanks to you. And he puked again. I saved you, though. The underground stream was deep and long. Roy had almost suffocated down there, but luckily, Letho had caught up to him and had taken him to safety. So we're even now, Letho said. They set up a bonfire to dry themselves up. At the same time, Roy managed to find a piece of wood to keep Letho's hurt leg in place. Then he fashioned the remaining wood into a crude crutch. When he was done with all that, he sat beside the bonfire and concentrated on his character sheet. Roy age. 13 years and 11 months old status. Civilian, Witcher disciple HP, 55 strength. 5 dexterity. 5.16.1 constitution. 5.5 perception. 7 will. 6.5 charisma. 5.6 spirit. 6.5 skills. Massacre level 4 observe level 2 meditation level 2 crossbow mastery level 1 elegance of the wind, passive, job. Level 4 Witcher, 600/2000, rank. Disciple, conditions for next rank. Pass the trial of the grasses and kill 10 types of magical creatures, 7/10. Next rank. Rookie Witcher. School. Viper, unconfirmed. User hasn't taken the decoction of the grasses yet. Job perks. Main stat. Will. Every time you level up, your will be increased by 0.5 without any cost, disciple. Evolving arms. You have bound Gabriel, crossbow, leveled up, GWIHYR, steel sword, leveled up. Silver sword. None. Full recovery. You will make a full recovery every time you level up. Most injuries can be healed, including internal injuries and broken limbs. Debuffs such as hunger, fatigue, poison, plague, and curses will be removed. Loot package. 2 cubic meters. You have 1 attribute points and 1 skill points left. Roy powered up a lot from the spelunking in Smyak. First, he gained the Ain El bloodline, turning him into a part.elf, granting him +1 in dexterity and charisma. Aside from that, he could feel more magic when he was meditating. Next, he gained a level in his job, so his will was increased by 0.5 automatically. He hadn't planned on making will his main stat, but when he leveled up on the verge of death, Roy subconsciously made that choice. Letho's charisma was his worst stat, followed by will. 10 points might have seemed a lot, but it was nothing compared to his other stats. In other words, it was incredibly hard to see will increase. Will was also related to fear's effect. As long as he kept killing monsters and leveling up massacre, will would become more useful. He knew fear wasn't the only skill will could affect. The stat description itself said will could interfere with reality when it reached a certain point. I'm looking forward to it. Besides, will was crucial for his survival in the trial of the grasses. He'd been surprised when he'd noticed will as his main stat, but he didn't regret it. After lots of consideration, Roy had decided to allocate everything to Constitution and will before undertaking the trial. Letho did promise him he'd use the Lucian's mutagen for the potion if Roy's physique passed the bar he set for him. Roy wanted that mutagen, so he'd do whatever he could to get it. Roy allocated the attribute point to Constitution and the skill point to Meditation. Since Meditation's level up would add 0.5 to Constitution and Will, Roy would see a 1.5 point increase in Constitution, and a 0.5 point increase in Will. That would cause him to see a 2.5 point change in his stats, so he wanted to get used to them before adding it to his stats and skills. Roy was about to concentrate on his bound weapons to see their change after leveling up, but his ears pricked, and he doused the flames before hiding in an alfalfa bush with Letho. A moment later, 2 farmers came over with their arms around each other's shoulder, and their hoes hung across their backs. One of them looked delighted. "Did you see that show last night? That dancer's slimmer than a snake, I tell ya, and her face is as white as snow. She's just like a goddess. I can't believe the filthy elves would have such beauty among them. What's the troop called? Sea lion or something. It's sea scorpion, ya oaf, the other farmer spat, looking oddly arrogant. And she wasn't dancing, ya dolt. That's called tightrope walkin'. And that elf's Evelyn Gallo. That's a work of art, dumbass. Usually only the rich get to watch that. I ain't got nothin', ya told me. But if there's one thing I know, it's that I'll watch it again if she's gonna perform tonight." The farmer rubbed his hands lewdly. "Ya dolt. What if your wife finds out about this? Ya gonna starve. I'm gonna wreck her pussy if she does that, just ya see." The farmer came to the alfalfa bush and took his pants off, revealing his soft member. "Look at this. It's bigger than Ol Dervish's donkeys. Only that elf could get it hard again." He aimed at the bush, humming with his eyes closed, then everything turned black. When he woke up, he and his friend were lying side by side. The night breeze was caressing their naked legs and chest hair. The farmers were in nothing but their underwear, though they were holding 2 crowns each. "Did someone rob us? The money's enough to get us new clothes though." They looked at each other, flabbergasted, but then they smiled. Roy was wearing a set of clothes that was 1 size too big, and he smiled wryly. Why did I even hide from them anyway? Reflex. You stayed in the tunnels for too long, Letho answered. I attacked civilians though. Does that count as a violation of the code? Are you dumb, boy? Letho was hobbling behind him, wearing a set of clothes that was one size too small, his chest almost bursting out. Letho pouted. That was self-defense, got it. They'd be pissing on you if you hadn't done that. And I'm sure you don't want to go around naked, I see. I hope the crowns are enough to pay for the damages. The weather warmed up after they'd left the Mahakams. The duo went toward the village to see if they could catch a carriage. The ground sloped downward, pointing toward a field that had a lot of cereal planted on it. Alders surrounded the field, forming a path that led to and fro the area. As they followed the path, the duo was led to the lakeside. Hidden behind the alder trees was a pond filled with ducks that quacked incessantly. A crude pier and lonely canoe sat quietly among the reeds, while nets and traps were set in the water. Roy stared at the ducks and licked his lips. I've had it with dry food. Since we're staying for the night, let's get some meat. He never expected the resources on the other side of the Mahakams to be that abundant. So, are we in Temeria now? Letho answered, to be precise, we're in Elander, though it's Temeria's duchy. He paused for a moment. You're getting used to the toxicity after the doses, I see. We'll rest here before going to the Temple of Melatel to proceed with the trial. Roy's heart skipped a beat. He'd been looking forward to that, but he was also worried. Roy stammered, Letho. I've always wanted to ask, but is your bald head a side effect of the mutation? They'd been traveling together for months, but aside from some stubble, Letho hadn't grown an inch of hair. On the other hand, Roy could tie his hair into a ponytail at that point. Why? Letho arched his eyebrow fiercely. Got cold feet because of some hair loss. Roy denied it. No. I'm just curious. Mutations happen randomly. You might not go bald, but you might lose some chest hair or some color in your skin. But that's nothing, really. Maybe Gerald lost his melanin during his mutation. That's probably why he has white hair and looks like someone with albinism. Is there any way to prevent that, then? Letho patted his shoulder. If you can get a sorcerer to help you out during the trial, they can alter the mutation and prevent most of the side effects from taking place. Are there any sorcerers in the Temple of Melatel then? Letho didn't answer. Eventually, they arrived at a human settlement, though it was just a small village. Rows of rickety houses lined the paths, and the barks of dogs and the crows of roosters were heard. The villagers threw curious glances at them, while the snotty brats chasing the chickens around sucked on their thumbs as they looked at the duo as if they were exotic animals. Roy, however, only had eyes for the circle of carriages in the center of the village. More than a dozen people dressed differently from the villagers leaned against the carriages, chatting happily. Is that the Sea Scorpion troop? Roy massaged his forehead before going up to them with Letho. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 84. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans. Chapter 84. Sea Scorpion Troop, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash. When the duo neared the carriage, they noticed 6 people leading the troop. 2 of them were young ladies, while the others were men. One of them was an elven sorceress with black red hair who was wearing a yellow, silk dress. She had a slim body, fair skin, beautiful features, and of course, a pair of pointy ears. This must be Evelyn, the one the farmers were talking about. The other lady was tanned. Instead of the reserved attire most women would don, she wore a white striped, leather midriff top that enveloped her generous chest snugly, revealing her toned abs and sexy, muscular legs. Her nose was long, and her features were manly. She had a mohawk and mysterious tattoos on both cheekbones. The 4 men had unique get-ups too. Their clothes were vibrant and fashionable, unlike the villagers. There was one muscular middle-aged man with a mustache, a tall, lanky man, and a pale, feminine one. The duo observed them, and so too were they observed. Evelyn frowned at the duo's stares, but she didn't fly into a rage. On the other hand, the tanned lady was staring back at them, feral. A burly, mustached man standing at 5'6" came out to welcome them. However, he was subtly on guard. "You two seem new here. I take it you aren't Shire locals. You must be the Sea Scorpion Troop." Roy smiled warmly, his gaze gleaming charismatically thanks to his passive skill. "I'm a traveler from Lower Posada, Eton. It's across from the Mahakams. This is my uncle, Letho. He hurt his leg on the way here, so he can't move well. I heard the villagers talking about your troop, so I came. If it's possible, can we hitch a ride? You're a traveler." The man looked at Letho. "Very well then. You may call me Alan. Alan the Sparrow Whisperer. Our troop has wandered across the lands and come across many fabulous things. Your eyes are sharper than an eagle's and gleam brighter than the sun. I know you're no ordinary traveler. To be more precise, you're a witcher. But you seem to have been robbed." "Yes. I'm Letho, from Viper School. This is my disciple, Roy," Letho admitted. "Tell us what you're really here for. I don't think witchers would just play a prank on us." The members stood beside Alan, looking hostile. The lady with the mohawk snarled, and she whipped out a dagger from her boot and made it dance between her fingers. Letho presented his hands, showing he meant them no harm. "Calm down, everyone. The boy is right. I've hurt my leg." He pulled up his pants to show them his injury. "You can verify it for yourself if you don't trust us. I think you know most humans are prejudiced against people like me, so that's why the boy didn't tell you everything." The troop members' expressions softened right away, as if they felt the same way Letho did. Roy took the chance to ask, "If I may ask, will you be going east to the Mahakams or taking the long way through Lower Sodden?" "No," Alan's eyes gleamed with longing. "We're going west, where the heart of Elander is. There, we shall perform. And then we will be heading to Vizima before May Day next year to take part in a grand spectacle. Roy and I are going to Elander to visit an old friend. Is it possible for us to ride with you?" Letho rubbed his leg. "I hurt my leg in a battle with monsters, and it's still not healed, so I can't walk too much. Riding on horseback won't be feasible either, so a carriage would be perfect." Well, Alan was in a dilemma. They'd have agreed to it if Letho was a normal human, but he was a powerful witcher. Alan was worried he might kill everyone on a whim. Even though witchers were outcasts like them, Alan still felt like refusing him. "We would never ask for anything without pay. It won't even take a week to get to Elander in a carriage." Letho raised 3 fingers. 30 crowns if you'll give us a lift." The short, ugly member looked tempted, but Evelyn refused Letho. "I'm sorry, Mr. Letho. If you take a look at our carriage, you'll see that it's filled with necessities, props, and Alan's trinkets. We don't have much space left for you." Miss Gallo of Ain sighed. Roy went around Letho and bowed at Evelyn with his right hand before his chest. "You can choose not to trust Letho, since he is a stranger, but I am not. I am your brethren. That is reason enough to trust me, isn't it?" Evelyn's eyes gleamed, and she looked at him closely. It was then she noticed Roy's pointed ears, and his looks had subtle elven traits to them. "Are you a half-elf?" "No, you're a part-elf, aren't you?" she said. Roy only had subtle elven traits, but he could speak ancient speech, so he said, "Enchis bina tide teghain." Evelyn was pleasantly surprised after hearing that, and she felt a surge of affection for Roy. And then she noticed her teammates looking confused, so she explained. "He was saying hello in ancient speech. That proves he is one of my tribe, though your name is weird, Roy." I've never heard anyone from a branch of the family use human names before. Oh, my foster mother gave me that name, but she has long passed. Roy stared down, pretending to be sad. You poor thing. You aren't even 30, are you? Evelyn frowned in sympathy, and then she held Roy's hands reassuringly. Call me Evelyn. Then she gave her teammates a pleading look. Fine, then. Alan sighed resignedly. Since Evelyn trusts you, you may come with us, but a word of warning. I'll have to set some rules before you go in. Break them and we'll break you. The duo nodded, and Alan told them about the troop in detail. There were about a dozen people in the troop, including the handymen, hitchhikers, and Bard. The main ensemble was Alan, the Sparrow Whisperer who came from Rivendell, Cantilla, the Blade Dancer from Zerrikania, the nation in the desert east of Blue Mountain, Collins, the Swallower of Flames, Faraz, the Joker, Amos, the Gwent Performer, and Evelyn Gallo, the acrobat from Dol Blathana. Roy finally remembered where he'd heard of Evelyn before. If he was right, she was the one who would help Geralt complete the condition for Hearts of Stone, and the one who would later go on to steal from Borsodi Auction House. But it's still a few years too early for Geralt to get his hands on the Heart of Stone. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 85. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 85. Keep, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. The moon shone on Shire Village where the Sea Scorpion troop was staying at the moment. That night, they were circling a bonfire in the village center, enjoying a grilled meat banquet with the newcomers. Alan took the main seat and raised many toasts to the duo. I welcome you to the troop, Roy, Letho. We'll be your comrades for the next few days, at least until we reach Elander. He downed that mug of wine and raised another toast. But I have a few things to mention here. Since you're coming with us, you'll be following our rules. You'll have to talk to everyone before doing anything. If you break that rule and cause any trouble, we'll have to ask you to leave. We've been wanderers for a long time now, so that's fine with us. Letho raised his cup calmly. Oh, good wine. Castel Revielo's Pomino, and 10 years of age, at that. Ah, it seems you know your alcohol, Letho. I see that folklore has demonized witchers quite severely. Alan grinned, hyping the mood up. The flames were starting to crackle as the lard from the pig it was roasting dripped into it. It roared higher, and the aroma wafted across the air. Evelyn was beside Roy, talking about the interesting things she'd seen after she'd left her tribe. Cantilla was giggling and nibbling away at Evelyn's ear, her eyes gleaming. Sitting across from them was Amos, who had a hook nose and was wearing a headscarf. He was leering at Evelyn, though of course, he got no response. On the other hand, the ugly Faraz was huddling closely to Collins as they bit into the roasted meat together. Roy noticed their mouths were almost glued together, and they looked very much in love. They're obviously dating. Brokeback Mountain in the Witcher world, huh? Roy was surprised, though the troop members weren't. He tried his best not to show any discomfort by shifting his attention to the meat. The flames crackled, and the smoke was filled with its scent. Its fat-to-meat ratio is just right, and it instantly melts in your mouth. This world's people sure know how to cook. Letho and him looked at each other and dug into their meat, holding a silent competition. They'd been eating biscuits and dry food for a week. It was their first normal meal in a while, so they appreciated it. A guest came halfway through the banquet. It was an old man, who was also Shire's chief. I hear you're leaving tomorrow, but if it's possible, can you stay for a while longer? Alan answered calmly, why? The chief sighed. Things are getting bad. Misfortune is running rampant. Boogeymen have been seen in the Mahakams, and you'll probably bump into kobolds or spriggans while on a leisurely stroll. Fairies and Rizalki have been kidnapping hundreds of children from the villages around, while drowners hide in the swamp, waiting to get the jump on passing carriages. And diseases we've never even heard about before are breaking out. It's disastrous. He downed some wine, and his face turned scarlet. It'd be a dull life without wandering troops putting on shows whenever they passed through villages. Most of us would have hung ourselves at this point. Roy burped and wiped the grease from his lips. So this chief is trying to lick their boots. And where did he hear those preposterous stories from? If monsters were running rampant, we would be seeing a lot more witchers than we are now. Alan, the leader of the troop, was also flabbergasted by the sudden praise. You flatter us. We aren't as noble as you think. All we're doing is giving our aid whenever possible. It's great to hear that we put smiles on Temerians' faces, especially in these troubled times. He snapped his fingers at everyone and let out a loud whistle, then something magical happened. A small, gray falcon darted out from the dark and flapped its wings as it perched on Alan's gloved hand, the flames illuminating it. The falcon nodded at everyone and cawed, and then it pecked at the roasted meat. And we didn't do it for free. Your village's roasted meat is quite a dish. Art says it loves it. Alan gazed at the falcon lovingly, as if it were his own son. I am delighted to hear that. Stay here for a while longer. Eat, drink, and be merry. The chief raised a toast. If it's possible, I want to tell you how I feel. He clenched his fists and started talking. It's just a few days' trip to Elander, but it's not safe. You should stay here for a little while longer. At least until Elander's troops have cleared the path. Our troop isn't weak. We won't be stopped by mere bandits. Alan sounded confident. And from what I've heard, Elander's Order of the White Rose only cares about the safety of the city. They don't care about the villages around them. It'd take too long if we were to wait for them. Alan was trying to ask the villagers of Shire about his true goal. Everyone stopped what they were doing at once and waited for the chief's answer. The chief trembled for a while before resolving himself. Then he said, I'll be honest then. Shire's in a predicament right now. Our trader, Andre, has been gone for half a month now, and we have no news about him at all. Rolling, who went to pick some herbs near the swamp, went missing as well. I fear the worst might have happened. The chief paused for a moment. And misfortune has been spreading throughout the village for a while now. Before you came, we were suffering from missing livestock. Chickens, dogs, cows, goats, sheep, you name it. And we hear all kinds of eerie screams at night. Tom, the night patrol, is scared out of his mind and refuses to step out of his house, even now. But the situation took a turn for the better once you came. Alan looked at him coolly. You're saying something's behind this, but we scared it away. Yes. The chief nodded incessantly. We think it's either a petty thief, or a ghost, or a phantom. But since you've arrived, the ghosts haven't shown up. They're probably scared of you guys. The troop members were on high alert after hearing that. Cantilla licked her dagger, and she seemed to be raring to go. Evelyn looked pensive, while Collins hugged Ferraz. Amos averted his gaze and curled on himself. I didn't mean to hide it from you guys. We can prepare a bounty for you, as long as, Alan interrupted him. We won't change our plans. The troop leaves tomorrow morning. The chief rubbed his hands, looking disappointed and awkward. I can understand why they're angry. Then he looked at Letho, who was already greasy and tipsy. Witcher, can you and your disciple stay back then? He hesitated for a while. We'll pay, sorry, Letho apologized. My leg's badly wounded. Even walking is difficult for me, let alone fighting. Roy wanted to say something, but he stopped himself when he thought about Letho's injury. Best not to cause any unwanted trouble for now. In the end, the chief left, looking despondent. The night darkened, and the members were drowned in their own thoughts. On the other hand, Roy took Letho aside for a quiet discussion. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 86. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 86. Dream, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, Roy and Letho retired for the night in a tent on the outer ring, since the inside ring of the carriage was reserved for the troops' ladies. Alan's tent stood out from the rest as usual, since it was set up far away from the carriages. He'd take his owl out for a hunt every night, as well as take watch. At least according to Evelyn's testimony. After he was done with dinner, Roy looked into his details that had changed after he'd leveled up. He wanted to see what had happened to his weapons. Bound weapons. Gabriel. Gabriel used to be an old, dusty hand crossbow, but it powered up after the level up. It has also become a better match for your abilities. Type. Hand crossbow materials. Mulberry wood, tendon, hemp details. Weighs 5 pounds and measures 2 feet. Has a draw weight of 20-30 pounds and an effective range of 100-150 feet. A spirit dwells within. Simplify. Gabriel reloads automatically as long as there are bolts in your inventory space. Reload time is now 0.4 seconds. GWIHYR. An ancient black metal flame sword made by gnomes. It has acquired a new skill after powering up. Materials. Black iron, lava, meteoric iron, pine wood, and body parts from powerful monsters. Details. The sword weighs 3.06 pounds, and its handle measures 9.3 inches, while the blade comes in at 36 inches. A spirit dwells within. Circulation. Heals the user for a small amount of stamina after every kill. Ignite. Every hit has a very low chance of igniting the target's blood and causing burn damage. Roy was grinning from ear to ear as he read up on his weapons. Gabriel's power-up was a big surprise for him. Not only did its damage get an increase, its reload time also enjoyed a dramatic speed-up. In his previous battles, Roy's enemies would have gotten near him before he could even fire his second shot, but he doubted that would happen again. He had to waste 4 seconds to reload before that, but after the power-up, all Roy had to do was aim and shoot. The system would do everything else for him. The time he saved was enough for him to fire 3, or even 4, shots. Even if he was flanked by 3 enemies, Roy was confident he could take them all out before they could even get near him. Since GWIHYR was already a rare sword to begin with, its power-up wasn't as drastic as Gabriel's, but having one new skill was nice, though he'd want to see how Ignite could help in his battles. Roy wanted to test the weapons out right that instant, but he thought it would be rude. Swinging my weapons around when I just got here. They'll think I'm a murderer. He stuck his head out to see if there was anyone around, but to his disappointment, the patrols were doing their job. Left with no choice, he kept his weapons. Since his curiosity would have to wait for its chance to be scratched, Roy entered meditation. He was exhausted, but he knew that was also the best time to power up. Eventually, he could feel the elements around him, though there were only traces of them. The elemental energy was still sheepish, but they were curious about him. Roy could also tell they wanted to come into contact with him, since they were swirling around him in silence. Even though it had only been days since he was turned into a part-elf, he could feel his affinity slowly strengthen. It was barely noticeable, but he was confident he would be able to control the elements as long as he kept it up every single day. It was a peaceful night. When Roy exited meditation the next morning, the sun was already shining on the land. Another glorious day. Alan was directing the packing, and the villagers of Shire came to help too, even though their request had been declined. Roy also noticed a group of kids huddling around the carriage. They seemed reluctant to say goodbye, and Roy could understand why. They were village children after all, so that was probably their only chance to see a troupe perform up close. Letho was in the carriage, taking in the bustling but orderly scenery. At the same time, Evelyn smiled and rolled her sleeves up before stuffing her carriage with some turnips. Evelyn. Even though he'd managed to get close to her the night before, Roy still felt awkward after meditating. "Did you sleep well last night?" "I did. Thank you." "Not to worry, Miss Evelyn," Letho interrupted. "The boy's been following me ever since his mother's death. He can sleep in swamps, bushes, cemeteries, and even shitholes." "Shut up, Letho." Roy threw him a look of complaint. "Can't he keep quiet about the shithole?" Then he looked at Evelyn nervously. "I care a lot about personal hygiene, unlike that dirty witcher over there." Letho looked at him mysteriously. "It's still a few months away from spring, boy." Roy took a moment to think about that. "Yeah, it's not mating season yet. That's besides the point. Why do I want to leave a good impression on Evelyn? And why can't I keep this urge in check? Did puberty hit me?" "No, the bloodline did." Evelyn looked envious of the duo's relationship. "My, you two seem close. I bet you were lying when you said he was your partner. You guys look more like father and son to me." "As if I'm his disciple. Witchers are sterile." They refuted Evelyn at the same time. "I see." Evelyn pushed her hair back. "Did you two hear it last night?" she asked nonchalantly. "Yes, but vaguely." Roy went back to the matter at hand. "The dogs have been barking all night, and there were growls coming from the ranch, but nobody saw who or what made those sounds. I wonder if there's actually a ghost here. Maybe it's getting up to no good now that the troop's leaving." Shire's chief tried to persuade the troop to stay one last time, but Alan adamantly refused. Everyone finished packing up before noon and bade goodbye to Shire, where they'd performed for a short while. Acres and acres of field that had lettuce, spinach, and turnips planted on them flanked the winding road ahead of the troop. The 6 carriages sauntered down the path, leaving nothing but wheel tracks and hoofprints behind. There were a few young men around the carriages, walking on their own 2 feet. Those were vagrants who joined the troop halfway through. They mainly managed manual labor and made little money from it, but it was enough to keep them alive. And they could enjoy the scenery. Having a group around them made them feel safer too, since empires switched hands at a blistering speed everywhere. Disasters, skirmishes, and wars were rife. Deserters eventually became bandits and thugs in remote villages, forcing people to leave their homes. According to Evelyn, the earliest tramps came to them more than 2 years ago. Without any land or home to call their own, more and more vagrants were born each day. The vagrants would go with the troop until they came across the land of their dreams. There, they would settle, but most of them would probably stay as tramps for most of their lives. All of a sudden, Roy thought Imhir's plan for conquest wasn't too bad. "Why'd you leave your home though, Evelyn? I think you should know this, brother." Evelyn had a sad look in her eyes. Everyone in Dol Blathana lived in peace for a few years under the Queen of the Field's leadership, but the Daisy of the Valleys led them back to the warpath. "I have a feeling they're conspiring something big. Something terrifying. I didn't want to have more blood on my hands, so I left." Roy thought about the ladies in Dol Blathana. Queen of the Fields and Daisy of the Valleys were 2 different factions in Ain Side. The former was a pacifist who wanted nothing but peace. She'd even pretended to be a normal girl and lived with the humans to that end. The queen was born with great magical talent, and she brought life everywhere she went. Daisy of the Valleys was a warmonger. She was the future queen of Dol Blathana, and the mastermind behind Scoia'tael. She'd repay every violent deed done by the humans tenfold, but she would also come on to abandon Scoia'tael for the elves. That was a story for another time though. "Your turn, Cantilla. Why'd you come all the way to join the troop?" The exotic blade master looked into the distance. "The people of Zerrikania are born warriors, and I want to prove that I'm the best of them all." She smiled, looking ever so dazzling under the sun. Then she pointed at the tattoo on her jaw. "One monster, one tattoo. I think that's fair. I got these from killing an Erichaz and a basilisk alone. I'd love to have tattoos all over my body while I'm still young. After all, can't exactly wait until I'm a decrepit old woman who can't even hold a blade properly. She paused for a moment. I have to go on this adventure. To search for the creature of my homeland's beliefs. So you're looking for a WIRM. Roy knew that Zerrikania's emblem was a dragon, and the leaders even built the Temple of Divine Dragons. A dragon, but yes. Roy didn't know what to say to that. True dragons, like white dragons, black dragons, red dragons, green dragons, and rock dragons, could easily destroy draconids like forktails, wyverns, dracolizards, and of course, solo witchers. Their physical strength was overwhelming, not to mention their fangs and claws. On top of that, they could breathe fire, acid, and even steam. There was also the Golden Dragon, a legendary dragon said to have mastered shape-shifting. You have a great dream, Roy said genuinely. Cantilla raised her chin proudly. I know you're laughing at my ignorance, but I'm not going to conquer them with brute force. Believe it or not, us Zerrikanians have a close link to dragons. I'll conquer them with my devotion. Of course. Good luck. What about Alan? Why did he create the troop? Any big dreams behind it? No, there was a look of longing and romance in Evelyn's eyes. Alan travels around the world to search for his true love. He says he can only be released from his pain after he finds the love of his life, the mother of his pets. Is he a bard? Roy had thought that Ari was an owl, and Art a falcon. That's weird and romantic at the same time. He thought Evelyn was kidding. Evelyn threw him a look, but before he could ask, she continued, Collins and Ferraz love each other, but unfortunately, they aren't nobles. Their love isn't what those nauseating nobles call a thing of dreams. Obviously, their relationship isn't accepted by anyone. All they got was discrimination. They can only act like a proper couple in the troop. Anything the nobles did would be romanticized, but the same thing was a death sentence for civilians. What do you think about them? Evelyn stared at him, her eyes sparkling. His heart skipped a beat. Well, I pray for their love, I think. He was on neutral grounds when it came to LGBT issues. What about Amos? Cantilla snorted in disdain. He's a bastard. Roy rubbed his chin. He's a Gwent performer, so he's a good player, isn't he? Does he have any rare cards? I think I can play with him. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 87. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 87. Insect Corpse, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. While everyone was having lunch, Letho called Roy and excused them from the troop. Did you smell it? They went into the bushes beside the path. Roy nodded. It was a group of carriages that carried a lot of merchandise. They just left Shire not long before the troop, and everything should have been normal, but Roy smelled blood. It's not human blood. I smell insects in it. Letho activated his Witcher senses to see the scent particles. He went past 5 gnarly trees before stopping in front of a burmetic bush. Then he pulled it back, and what was inside made Roy gasp. There was a small hill of corpses in there, the stench of blood wafting through the air. The corpses looked like gray spiders, enlarged a few hundred times. Since it was winter, they were still fresh. The duo didn't rush to investigate the scene. Instead, they brandished their weapons and moved ahead cautiously. Letho then cast Art on the corpses to make sure the critters were all dead. Weird. Why's there a hill of monster corpses here? It's not something monsters or beasts would do. Letho beckoned Roy, and the boy went to check on the corpses. Their bodies are covered in fur and chitin. No distinct line between the thorax and abdomen. They have 4 legs and a small head. Can't make out the facial features. Letho tried to mislead Roy. Endrega workers, huh? Nice try. I don't see any stinger or pincers on them. These are kikimores. Endregas and kikimores were insectoids born after the conjunction of the spheres. They usually lived in the wilds and hunted beasts or even wandering humans. They were also a threat to witchers. Roy turned the corpse over, revealing a soft, yellow belly that was vulnerable compared to its gray, armored back. This is why it's dead. Someone or something gutted it. It's putrid, green entrails splattered on the ground, its legs covered in dirt. Must have struggled before it was killed. Roy brushed his hand on the edge of the wound, looking concerned. Then he checked another body. Claw marks on its back. And most of its body is twisted. The killer must be strong. Look, it almost got torn in half. This one's got holes in its belly. Looks like something bit it off. It's a clean bite in the center, but the edges are jagged. Its killer's teeth are sharp. Canine-like, probably. Roy continued, oh, this one's still alive, but barely. Insects are resilient, huh? Roy put it out of its misery. You killed a kikimore. EXP plus 30. 2 types left. Roy pulled the bolt from the insect's head. It was drenched in green blood, and Roy got some on his hand. He pulled out a handful of grass covered in dewdrops to wipe his hand off. Got anything? Letho gave him a quizzical look. There are 13 bodies here. A whole kikimore colony. The killer took out a whole colony on its own. Roy was frowning, concerned. With claws sharp as daggers and teeth lethal as poison. Probably panthers or wild dogs. Or foglets, maybe. Letho had voiced his opinion, but he knew he was wrong. No beast is strong enough to take them out that cleanly. Foglets have different teeth. And besides, Roy scanned the scene of the massacre. I have a feeling there's only one killer. These aren't the killing grounds. Everything's covered in grass, and there's a lack of footprints here. Letho stopped asking him about the killer. If that's the case, the killer must be as powerful as a witcher at their peak. Do you still want to continue? Roy was in a dilemma. We have to do this whether we like it or not. The troop could get attacked at any time, and we'll be right in the middle of it. We have to at least find out what that thing is so we can prepare for it. Roy knelt one on knee and plucked a handful of grass that was caked in red blood. The killer's blood. I have to tell Alan what we're up to in case they get worried. I'll leave the tracking to you. After Roy had gone off to the troop, Letho hobbled along the path for a few minutes and arrived at the source of the scent. There was nothing there except for some craters on the ground around it and barren tongue trees and messy footprints. Most of them were the kikimore's footprints, but there were a few gigantic footprints among them. The most distinct part was how they only had 3 toes. There was also something bizarre in the clearing center. Green spheres the size of human fists huddled together tightly, but there was a smidgen of reddish black among them, obviously caused by a claw. Those were kikimore larvae, but they were destroyed, leaving nothing but sticky fluids and dead young kikimores. It doesn't leave anything behind, huh? Letho investigated a tongue tree and saw some claw marks on the bark. He wondered if they were left by the killer on purpose, and then his eyes gleamed. The troop members were starting to get restless when Letho came back. Alan even came to talk to him. Please don't stay away for too long next time, Letho. Everyone's been waiting for you. You might not need this advice, since you too are experienced survivalists, but don't leave the camp at night. Alan waited for their answer and only left when he got their guarantee. What did you find? I went back to the scene after you left and found something interesting. Letho looked in Shire's direction. The nest isn't that far from Shire, and there's frequent activity between both spots. What are you trying to say? I found bones of livestock in those bodies, and also a human shirt. Roy was surprised to hear that. So that means the chief got it all wrong. The villagers weren't harmed by Rozalki or fairies, these Kikimores did it. Then he looked confused. The killer's doing them a favor. That's weird. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 88. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 88. A Monster Among Us, Part 1, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, Roy and Letho were talking in the carriage. Why did it kill all the Kikimores? To keep the villagers safe. Roy couldn't believe his guess. The killer was a strong monster from what they'd seen, and none of them would go out of their way to help humans. Do you know what the killer is? Probably. Everything else matches it, though there's no urine. Letho didn't look too sure. But best not speculate before we actually see it. So why did it do this? Roy asked. Is it protecting the villagers? Letho answered, probably a coincidence. Maybe it just moved here, and it's very territorial, so it killed all the Kikimores. The troop should be fine if they get out of its range. Letho calmed himself down. Don't worry too much about it, and don't tell the troop about this. At the same time, the troop was keeping a close eye on the duo. You've been getting along with them well, Evelyn. I trust you know them fine enough. Alan crossed his arms, his eyebrow arched quizzically. We don't hear anything bad about the Viper School in the north, and they look normal enough, but for some reason, I think they're hiding something. Evelyn bit her lip. I'm sure Roy's fine. I can trust him, but, she changed her tune. I'm not sure about Letho. He's a man of few words, and even fewer emotions. I get the chills every time he looks at me. It's like he can see through my soul. His injuries don't seem fake though. They say Witchers are emotionally messed up. Looks like that isn't just a rumor after all. Collins thumped his hairy chest. Fret not, Alan. I'll keep an eye on those two. It's just a Witcher with a limp and a little brat. They don't even have weapons to boot. We can take them down easily. Watch it, Alan warned him. There are guests, so don't get on their bad side. We might need their help someday. He turned to Evelyn. Evelyn will keep an eye on them for us. Don't let them out of your sight. Roy's interested in Gwent, right? Get Amos to play a match or two against him. He'll win some crowns for us. And Collins, don't let them run around tonight. Yes, sir. Evelyn went back to the carriage Roy was in, while Alan leaned against his carriage and let out a shrill whistle. A moment later, Art darted out and perched on his arm, holding a grayish-white feather in its beak. Alan's face fell. You cheeky boy. He smacked Art's head. Pulling a prank on Ari again when she's asleep. She's your sister. You should protect her, not bully her. Art cawed for a while before staring down like a child who got scolded. Then it pecked at Alan's hair, trying to get back in his good books. Alright, fine. But if there's a next time, Art tucked its trembling wings in and nodded incessantly. Good boy. Alan stopped his bad cop act. My boy, do you think I can find my love in Elander this time? Art cawed again. Good boy. I knew it. My love is in Elander. Alan caressed his falcon lovingly, but there was great sadness in his eyes. Letho was meditating and healing himself up in the carriage, while Roy was staring at the long road ahead of them, worried. The killer that wiped out a whole Kikimore colony must have been as strong as the Leshen. Even though it couldn't revive, the traces it left told them that the monster was faster, stronger, and had a bigger bite than the Leshen. Roy didn't think he could go against that monster in his current condition either. Letho was injured, and their items had run out. The whole troop would be in danger if they were attacked by it. Everyone in the troop was also observed by Roy. Most of their stats were slightly higher than normal humans. They were nimbler or stronger too, but only slightly. Also, they had one or two basic combat skills, so the troop members were on par with normal soldiers, but not even a dozen of them could take on that monster. Something's wrong. The members don't seem too strong, so why is Alan so confident they could beat the bandits? Is it overconfidence? Or something else? Roy thought the case wasn't so simple. From what Evelyn had told him, he realized the troop had traveled to many countries and regions, but they'd never gotten into any big trouble. Since he couldn't figure it out, Roy ignored it and concentrated on his character sheet. 1 attribute points and 1 skill points left. Roy allocated the attribute point to Constitution, and then he felt a surge of warmth course through his body, as if he were bathing in a hot spring. He could feel countless hands massaging him, rejuvenating his body. Constitution. 5.56.5 HP, 55-65 foot. Since he had experience adding 2 attribute points at the same point, adding only 1 point didn't burden him at all. In fact, the comfort was slowly making him sleepy, but it was not to be. He noticed a gale coming toward him, and he dodged by reflex. Annoyed, he looked up to see a card spinning back to its owner. Then out came a man in a white robe. His head was covered in a turban, his long mustache wiggling on his lips. The man was lanky, but he was built big. Amos the Gwent performer looked surprised when Roy had managed to dodge that. The thing he threw at Roy was a standard Gwent card. "You're nimble, boy." As expected from Letho's friend. Roy held his anger back. "Is that so?" He sized Amos up. "That's a unique way to say hi, Mr. Amos. This is the first time someone tried to kill me just to say hello. Is this your hometown's custom?" Amos leaped up to the carriage, his robe billowing. "It was just a friendly greeting. Besides, you're fine, aren't you?" Amos leaned against the carriage smugly. Roy stared down and made a decision. "Do you need something?" Amos raised his head in provocation. "Evelyn told me you're a great Gwent player despite your age. Coincidentally, Gwent's my hobby. Care to play?" "Sure." Roy rubbed his hands. "Why don't we make this spicier? Let's bet something." He smiled innocently. Amos beamed. "I don't see why not. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released." Chapter 89. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 89. A Monster Among Us, Part 2, TL. Osaka, PR. Amos wiped the sweat off his forehead, but the heat was still suffocating him. He loosened his collar, but it didn't have any effect, so he took his turban off. It was a cool, winter day, but his dried, curly hair stuck to his head, drenched in his sweat. What's going on? Why am I losing everything? Amos thought he was fighting on equal grounds with Roy, since they both had wins and losses, but when he actually took the time to calculate his losses, he realized he lost everything. The right side of the board, where he'd put his rare cards, was empty. On the other hand, the right side of Roy's board was stacked with rare cards, attracting everyone's eyes, as if they were precious stones. It was a devastating loss. Not only did Amos lose the crowns Roy paid the troop, he even lost Vesemir, his gold card, and his Necromancer, a silver card. He went through a lot to get those cards, since they never showed up on the market. This sly little fox. He finally realized what was going on. Roy might have looked like an inexperienced boy, but ever since the game was underway, he'd been luring Amos in like a fisherman waiting for his fish to bite the bait. When he'd realized what was going on, he'd already lost everything he had. But he's just a boy. Impossible. Is he a prodigy? Amos looked at Roy seriously. He wondered if Roy knew what he was thinking or if he was cheating. He always turned the tables and took Amos down. Even if he wasn't the best player, he was among the top. Amos knew he couldn't afford to stay arrogant anymore, so he pleaded sheepishly. Roy. Can you give me back my cards? Every Gwent performer worth their salt has a gold card, you know. Those cards are the prize of my trade. Amos squeezed a tear out. I can't live without them. My life's gonna be a mess. I see. Roy threw him a look. How much are you going to pay for your life, then? Amos froze. I keep all my money back in Vivaldi. I can take it out once we're at Elander, though. I just want the cards. I guarantee you won't be disappointed with the price. We'll see about that when we're in Elander. Is there really no room for discussion? Winners keepers. You can't be a sore loser, right, Mr. Gwent performer? Amos flew into a rage. If fury could burn, the whole place would have been razed to the ground. But then he glanced at Letho. Even though Letho had his eyes closed, he still struck fear into Amos' heart. Since he couldn't do anything, Amos snorted and left the place. I'm done. Then Roy said, you might win the next game. I have Yarpen Zygrin here, you see. It's a gold card. Amos stormed away, while Roy beamed. He'd won back his crowns and a gold Gwent card as a bonus in just a few games. The bouncer back in Walls Inn said the Gwent tournament would start in the north soon. I'll have to take part in it in Elander if I get the chance. Letho's guess was probably right on the money. The caravan was out of the monster's territory a short while later, and they weren't attacked either. The next couple of nights were uneventful, though Roy tended to most of Letho's needs, so Letho spent most of his time recovering. Thanks to that, he regained part of his strength. Also, Amos seemed to be really salty about his losses, so he asked his troop members to challenge Roy. Roy, ever the welcoming boy, accepted their challenges and made a small fortune. Since then, everyone looked at him weirdly. They were fearful, but also angry. The only one who ever won against him was Evelyn, and that was only because Roy let her. When Amos found out about that, he stopped haunting Evelyn. He was ashamed to even talk to her, since it meant she was a better player than him by extension. At least he knows his place. But he keeps looking at me like he has some plans lying in wait. Roy wanted to teach him a lesson, but he was on someone else's turf, so he refrained from doing so. He was also annoyed about something else. The troop had been keeping a close eye on them, albeit subtly at times. But that couldn't escape his perception. He could feel the members' eyes on them at all times. Even Evelyn was supervising him, and she was genuinely nice to him. Everyone else was just pretending to respect them. He never felt so annoyed before, not even back in Caer or Mount Carbon. It was the first time he felt that upset when someone so blatantly distrusted them. It was worse than facing off against a bloodthirsty monster. He was a human boy to begin with. Even though he'd seen the discrimination faced by the Witchers, the full effect didn't hit him until he was at the receiving end. Letho once told him, monsters aren't the first problem new Witchers will run into, it's the change in humans' attitude. Most spend years getting used to the discrimination. Humans are social creatures, but Witchers have to learn to live alone. I have to face monsters and humans' bad attitude, huh? Best not to dwell on it. I should meditate. Roy started spending more time on meditation, just like Letho did. And half a day had passed since then. Something interesting also happened over the next couple of days. Roy noticed Alan leaving camp one night with his owl, Ari. He went into the bushes outside the camp area, and he didn't even bring any weapons with him. When Roy looked into it, he realized Alan was doing the same thing every night. Owls are nocturnal animals, so I can understand why it goes out at night, but why'd Alan go along? He's not much better than a normal guy. He'll get himself killed by going into the forest at night. Letho's necklace didn't detect any magic from the troop members, so Roy knew Alan didn't have any magical items on him. Alan kept bringing Ari into the forest every night, until the 5th day came. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 90. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 90. A Monster Among Us, Part 3, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. The sky was overcast that day. Dark clouds hung above them, and rumblings of thunder were heard from the heavens above. After getting through the forest, the troop came across a path that was flanked by rocky walls. Halfway through the valley, the troop stopped, for they noticed a fresh trail of blood on the ground. Everyone started whispering, while Roy brought his guard up. It looked like someone or something dragged the bloodied body up the path. The victim's body must have been cut up by the sharp rocks as it got dragged along, leaving chunks of flesh behind. It was obvious that that place was ground zero. Aside from the trail of blood, there were also strips of cloth, some boots, a few rusty hoes, and weapons improvised from farming implements. The trail extended ahead. Behind the boulders flanking the path ahead stood a destroyed spike, though every piece was as big as a carriage. What kind of monster did this? Alan quickly ordered the troop to get out of the valley. Everyone backed off, and Alan decided to investigate the scene along with some of the members. The duo insisted on joining the recon team, and Alan failed to dissuade them, so he let them do what they wanted. The putrid stench of blood filled the scene. Letho sniffed the air to look for clues, and then he hunkered down to observe the flesh and blood on the ground. He touched them and pondered for a while. This is fresh. The attack probably happened last night. Surprisingly, nobody was shocked to hear that. Instead, they were calm, abnormally so. Roy was used to it, since he practically killed a mountain of neckers, but he didn't expect the troop members to be as well. So they came across something similar before. Be careful, Letho. You aren't fully healed yet, and God knows if there's anything in there, Alan suddenly told them. I can hold my own. The team approached the boulders ahead of them, which were as big as the destroyed blockage behind the boulders. The road narrowed to a small path that only allowed one carriage to cross. Roy leaped onto the boulder and looked down. This is a natural barrier. It's perfect if you want to hold the fort, and anyone who wishes to travel to Elander must pass this valley. I'd stop any travelers and extort them too if I were in the same position. What are you trying to say? This isn't Elander's official checkpoint. Shire's chief is right. The path to Elander is blocked by bandits, but these guys got caught in something bad. Where are they right now? The team went around the boulders and saw the 300-pound blockade, then they noticed the small hill of human corpses. Some had their throats slit open, some were disemboweled, some had their spines broken, and some were torn to pieces. The tattered clothes they were wearing were already drenched in blood. Roy was reminded of the revolutionists he'd met outside Aldersburg. The Temeria wilds are full of resources. Even if these guys hated farming, they could have become poachers. That'd still put food on the table. Why'd they become bandits anyway? The hill of corpses finally sent the team into panic. A scrawny man stood up. Why don't we go around, Alan? Foolishness, a muscular, mustached man retorted. The bandits are dead, and the blockade is smashed to pieces. Why should we go around? I say we go ahead. Yes, someone agreed. These bastards deserved it. This must be retribution for Melitel, a devout believer said. Melitel, huh? Roy dismissed it. Melitel wouldn't be so cruel as to break anyone's body. He and Letho looked at each other before going in to investigate the corpses. There were 15 of them. Most of the deceased were adults, but there were 2 kids and an old man. When Roy found 20 crowns on the corpses, the pious member went into a frenzy. See? I told you this is divine retribution. Melitel's giving me her blessing. She's always generous and helps her believers. Nobody else would have stumbled upon those crowns. Yeah, there are a lot of crowns. A guy with scabies on his head laughed. Enough for a few pints, eh? Shut up. That's blasphemy. Nobody noticed Roy and Letho looking more and more worried as the investigation went on. The bandits suffered the same wounds the Kikimores had. But we left that place days ago. Did it follow us? What happened, Letho? Is something wrong? Letho gazed at everyone sharply, and some of the members shivered from the intensity of his gaze. What happened? Letho didn't answer, so Alan turned to Roy. Roy snapped out of it and gulped. The killer isn't human. No human has this kind of strength, nor do they have claws, and the footprints aren't human either, but the killer isn't Melitel. What is it then? Everyone was waiting for the answer nervously, but Roy changed the topic. Hey, you said Melitel always helps you out, didn't you? Did she clear the path every time you guys ran into the same problem? Yeah. I've been traveling with the troop for 2 years, and something this freaky happened twice. Another guy backed him up, albeit without certainty. Now that you say it, it's actually true. Once in Dol Blathana. And Ard Karay. The team started making a ruckus, but one snort from Alan shut them up. Alan went up to Roy and grinned toothily. Letho, Roy. He let out a hearty laugh. Let's call it a day, eh? The bandits are dead, and you guys got some money out of it. Now, let's go back and push forward. No matter what it is, it helped us out, didn't it? Yeah, his team said. Letho answered calmly, very well then. We'll call it a day. Roy went back silently, but once he got into the carriage, he mumbled, I saw a scar on his neck. That scar's new. We got everything wrong. The one who killed the Kikimores wasn't in Shire. He's always been with the troop. We're playing with fire. But it doesn't seem to be hostile at the moment, nor did it do anything unforgivable. Letho looked confused too, since all that monster knew was chaos and mindless murder. Can beasts really possess human intelligence? The proof is in the pudding. Let's just keep quiet and watch, Letho answered. They couldn't do anything else anyway. And Letho started wiping GWIHYR, while Roy looked weirdly at Alan, who was calming everyone else down. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released.